we're getting along very well. We're getting along very well.
That is, if you don't count the trade war. U.S. President Donald Trump was all smiles Friday at a FIFA soccer event as he sat next to Mark Carney and Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum. In fact, the president stood up and danced to a performance of YMCA as the other leaders grinned and laughed along. I'm Catherine Cullen, and this week on The House, did the Washington, D.C. meetup move the ball on trade? Also, the fight to build more housing. Is quicker relief possible for Canadians struggling with high housing prices? We'll take a closer look. And our feature interview with Bob Rae, the former UN ambassador, no longer has to be diplomatic. What he thinks Trump's lasting impact will be, and the parallels he sees between this geopolitical moment and George Orwell's 1984. But we kick things off with Trump and Carney, face to face again. The House is now in session. We're going to dive right into the political drama and the dance moves with our panel of political watchers. Stephanie Levitz is a senior reporter for the Globe and Mail, and Joël-Denis Bellavance is Ottawa bureau chief for La Presse. We spoke late Friday afternoon. Steph, JD, welcome back to the House.
Hello.
Good to be here.
JD, a lot of us on the Hill watching this World Cup draw in Washington, trying to get any kind of insight into, yes, the Carney-Trump dynamic, but fundamentally whether this is going to mean anything for Canada-U.S. trade. What's your sense of how much this trip mattered?
I don't think it's going to move the ball anywhere. I think it's pretty much...
I see what you did there, FIFA, move the ball. Yeah.
I think it's going to be pretty much status quo. And because Canada, I think, is learned a lesson over the last few months that whatever Donald Trump says may not materialize. I'll give you an example. When he suspended talks in October, he threatened to impose a 10% supplementary tariff on Canada. That did not happen. So I think Mr. Carney wanted to be there, be a good player, be a big soccer player, if I may say, maybe dance YMCA with Mr. Trump, but not make any waves. And I think that was his main goal. And maybe just say that if you're interested one day to talk again about the future of trade between Canada, United States, and Mexico, I'm open to talk, but not really kickstart those talks there in Washington while everybody was paying attention to who would play whom during that FIFA tournament.
I had to remind myself, Steph, that people were watching this for the sports part of it because I was so interested in the politics. But I do wonder to what extent Mark Carney can make this argument work. He ran an election campaign on Canada winning this trade war. How challenging is the argument right now that it is time to sort of perhaps take the foot off the gas of the Canada-U.S. relationship and focus on other economic issues?
I mean, look, politics isn't of itself a blood sport, right? And Mr. Carney decided to engage in politics and make his pitch to Canadians on the Trump question. And every interaction these two men have is so highly scrutinized, in part because Mr. Carney doesn't seem to want to talk about them. And so it forces the question again and again, what is going on here? What are these conversations you're having with the president? And so, of course, people are watching this, yes, to find out, what games are going to be played, but what political game is getting played here? Are we going to, I'm going to keep going with the sports analogy, are we going to move the ball farther down the field? Is there going to be...
Who is getting played?
Right, who is getting, what kind of penalties, red cards, yellow cards, like what is happening with this deal? And I think the pressure for Mr. Carney, I mean, if we already want to look into our crystal balls for the year to come, right? We seem to have reached the end of Mr. Carney laying the groundwork for things to respond to Donald Trump. So I'm thinking about supports for steel, supports for auto, supports for softwood. We have the new MOU with Alberta and the ways that is seeking to reset our economic relationship with the world. These are all plans and pathways he needs to action these items. He needs to be able to show something tangible to Canadians so that they can say, yeah, I made the right choice when I voted for this Liberal government again this past spring.
Okay, JD, I'm going to be the last one to torture the soccer metaphor and say we're moving on to who's on the team and who's off the team to talk about this mini cabinet shuffle that we saw at the beginning of the week. Stephen Guilbeault has, of course, left. Mark Carney brought back in Mark Miller. What is the net effect of the change-up?
Well, I would say that Mr. Carney is bringing back a very competent minister that was part of the Trudeau era. And one of the assets that Mr. Miller brings to the table is his relationship with First Nations. As minister responsible for services with First Nations and Relations Autochtones Couronne, the Crown
Indigenous Partnership, yeah.
He was very much appreciated by First Nations. So by bringing him back to the table, I think Mr. Carney may be a play a bigger role than we think about culture and the Canadian identity, and also try to smooth things with the First Nations, because he was appreciated when he was minister in charge of Indigenous issues, and when he was moved to immigration by Justin Trudeau, a lot of people in the First Nations community deplored that, felt that this was a loss for them. So bringing it back, it's a good thing for that.
I am interested also in this question, JD, of the extent to which, we're talking a lot about whether Mark Carney, how much he has moved the Liberals to be at the right, be at the centre. And obviously, Mark Miller is very much associated with the Justin Trudeau era. Do you think that's part of the calculation here?
It's true, but Mr. Miller is also, wants to get things done quickly, just like Mr. Carney. And when he gives marching orders, he wants result. That fits with his philosophy of government.
Steph, this was ultimately a very small shuffle and involved a couple of other ministers. Do we think, though, that there are other players around the table that are likely to change in the medium term when it comes to Mark Carney's cabinet?
I mean, to some degree, yes, there has to be. I mean, think of House Leader Steve McKinnon, who currently holds also the transport portfolio, which he was handed when Chrystia Freeland resigned altogether from cabinet. Dominic LeBlanc picked up the internal trade piece of her portfolio. But setting aside the internal trade and Mr. LeBlanc, transport's a big file. I mean, that's a heavy lift. You're talking about the airline sector. You're talking about, again, spitball, this major projects effort, high-speed rail, all of these things. And it's a lot for Mr. McKinnon, although capable he is. He is the House leader in a minority government situation where support for the government is not guaranteed on any confidence measure. Right now, the Parliament is completely gummed up. It's not clear that anything is going to move forward. And that's Mr. McKinnon's job, is to get that stuff forward. So I do think there's got to be another shuffle coming in some capacity. And there are lots of people opining about other weak ministers who need to get moved around. Are we done with the fallout from the pipeline deal with Alberta? Are we done with other MPs making choices, choosing to go places? Could that change the calculus? And let's also not forget, we have these diplomatic appointments that are kind of hanging in the offing.
Bill Blair, Jonathan Wilkinson, are they leaving?
Are they going to go? They're not in cabinet, obviously, but like that, those opportunities, then you have by-elections, then you have Mr. Carney saying, who can I bring in to be in my cabinet? There's a lot of pieces on the at play right now that he could be, jostling around with.
It's not just about the pieces, JD, but it's obviously about the political agenda, the policy, what the government wants to do. Only one sitting week left and some big issues to tackle. We know we're expecting new justice legislation. The Liberals are trying to get their hate crimes legislation passed. It's very contentious. There's promised action on the gun buyback plan. What are you going to be watching?
Next week, I'll be watching mostly the tone of the debates, and that, I think, will dictate how people will be behaving in the House of Commons when it returns in January. And are we going to gear up for spring elections? I know I mentioned that word, and that scares a lot of people, but, the spirit of compromise, if it existed in September, is totally gone now. We saw it with Elizabeth May, was saying that she regrets now voting for the budget. So that's a lost vote. So I think confrontation will be on the agenda until the end of this session, but this will set the tone for the January return of Parliament.
Steph?
One of the things I'll be watching for is just to go back to the pipeline. So the Conservatives have an Opposition Day motion coming. They are going to force a vote on the pipeline and try and force the Liberal caucus to say, does it support this new pipeline, and in particular the lifting of the oil tanker ban? So that's definitely a motion designed to put more cracks in the caucus facade for Mr. Carney, and as much as they can say they're unified, I don't think it's that solid. And so I'm looking for that. I mean, there are pieces of legislation, Catherine, like old ones, C4, the affordability bill, the big bill, is not through the House of Commons. I mean, he hasn't had any sort of big legislative wins yet. So the question is, by the time we, go home for the holidays, will the Senate even have seen any of these bills, put them through? So again, by the end of the year, Mr. Carney can point to something concrete he has done for Canadians in the House of Commons.
Lightning fast, quick thought, last thought from both of you. It's been an incredible year in politics. Mark Carney A lot of people wouldn't have expected him to be here this time last year. Justin Trudeau was still prime minister. How satisfied should he be with what this year has held for him? JD?
I think very much satisfied because he dictated the agenda in terms of the economic policies that Canada should be pursuing, and also trying to get rid of our economic dependence towards the United States. That is a big, mandate. It's not going to be realized over a short period of time. So I would say he should ask Santa to be generous with him.
Steph?
Yeah, I mean, definitely more candy than coal in his stocking. He flipped the political narrative on its head. He rescued a moribund Liberal Party. There's MPs who were certain they'd be doing something else by now. And like JD said, he's, I think, gotten people thinking in a very sharp new way about the Canadian economy and how it needs to change right now.
Thank you both so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Steph Levitz and Joel Denis Bellevance.
The Prime Minister and I launched Build Canada Homes, and Build Canada Homes is mandated to scale up the supply of affordable housing across Canada, backed by an initial capitalization of $13 billion.
Housing Minister Gregor Robertson at committee this week defending his government's plans on a pressing political issue. According to the Parliamentary Budget Officer, Canada needs to build 700,000 homes in the next decade. But the PBO suggested this week that's a tall order, estimating the government's signature new housing office, Build Canada Homes, will only create about 26,000 affordable housing units over the next 5 years. The talk of years, even a decade for a fix, leaves people like Peter DeVoost worrying about the future. Peter's a 34-year-old small business owner in Vancouver. He rents a one-bedroom laneway house that's just enough space for him and his dog, Casey.
Where the housing market stresses me out is thinking about the future where, I would like to have a family. I'd like to have the space to have a family. I mean, I can't, I can't have like a kid living in this size of house. It just won't work. I'll have to move eventually, and I'm not liking the prospects of what I see. I would love to own a house, and that just doesn't seem like an option for the foreseeable future. And I don't see how it ever would be.
When he flipped through the federal budget last month, he wasn't sure there was anything in it that would help him.
My impression is that the sort of overall strategy of the federal budget is to invest in the economy so that the economy as a whole does better, people get better jobs, wages go up, all that kind of stuff, which sounds great, but it sounds like it might address the problem in the next 5+ years when people are struggling now and have been struggling for years now. In 5 years, I'm going to be almost 40 years old, which is, it's not that old, right, to start a family, but it's unsettling to think that things might start to get better in 5 years. I might start being able to save for a house in the next few years. It makes me uncomfortable. And I do wish that there were more immediate measures to address the needs of people who are in my position and are looking at the future without a whole lot of hope or optimism. I mean, the cost of rent is a problem. I think that sort of it feeds the issue, right? So if building more supply is going to take a lot of time, then it would be nice to make it easier to save money for the future. Until recently, I had 2 jobs. One is a company that I started, and then I was working for the university. And since leaving that job, I've needed to lean on my parents for assistance every month just to make ends meet, and that's a real challenge. That's really difficult to go from being self-sufficient to needing help every month for the past little while. So they can't help me save for a house, right? Maybe there's a situation where they could help me with a down payment, but I'm not saving my money right now. I'm scraping by.
That was 34-year-old Vancouver resident Peter DeVoost. Given the size of the housing problem, how quick can relief really come? Scott Aitchison is the Conservative housing critic. Welcome back to the House.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Catherine.
Thank you. The Liberals say their plans are the most aggressive housing budget in Canadian history. What letter grade would you give the government on how they're handling housing?
I'd give them a solid D.
D.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, because it's a lot more of the same that we've seen from Liberal governments. You know, Justin Trudeau announced his national housing strategy in 2017, referred to it as life-changing, transformational. And in that time span, housing prices have doubled. And so what this government has done now is they've created a fourth federal housing bureaucracy that is supposed to, we don't exactly know what it's going to do other than maybe help finance some projects that might not quite meet the cut.
You're talking about Build Canada Homes. Okay.
So that's now on top of the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, the Department of Housing and Infrastructure, and the Canada Lands Company. So there's three already. Now we have a fourth one called Build Canada Homes, and they're talking about utilizing techniques like factory-built homes and that kind of stuff, and that's all well and good. But the root cause and the root problem in our housing system in this country, particularly the epicenter of the housing crisis in the GTA and the Lower Mainland, is the cost and the burden of government, whether that's the taxes, charges, fees, or the long, painful approvals process. And they have not addressed that. They campaigned on it. They talked about it. It seemed almost like Prime Minister Carney understood the issues when he talked about getting development charges cut in half. And this budget, for example, talks about doing a bit better.
Substantially reducing, I believe, development charges. So why is that not good enough?
Because it's not a real target. This is part of the problem. If you are not setting real clear targets for what we need to achieve, then you have no hope of ever achieving them. Right? I mean, they talked during the election campaign about 500,000, homes a year. They're going to build at a pace not seen in generations. And now the Parliamentary Budget Office has reported on Build Canada Homes that it looks like they'll get about 26,000 units built in the next 5 years.
I will just say about that, what the federal government said in response to that report by the Parliamentary Budget Officer is that there is an assumption that a lot of these programs are just going to not be renewed, and that, in fact, the government hasn't made those decisions yet. I believe the finance minister said you don't make decisions for 2029 and 2025. So with the suggestion that there could be more to come from the Liberal housing plan than what we've seen thus far.
Well, and that sounds an awful lot like what the housing minister said on a recent podcast, where when he was asked specifically about the proposal that conservatives and the building industry and, frankly, housing experts like Mike Moffat have suggested is removing the HST off of all homes, at least under $1.3 million. He saw that as a great big roll the dice kind of move and kind of risky. But we've heard across the industry and the experts, they say, unless you're doing big, bold moves like that, you're tinkering at the edges, you're not going to solve the problem. People are getting laid off in this business already.
I just want to make sure that the audience is following along here. The Liberals have reduced GST for first-time home buyers within a certain threshold.
Right.
What you are proposing, what Mike Moffat has talked about, is it shouldn't just be first-time home buyers. It's anybody who's buying a primary residence.
And the reason we're calling for that is because the first-time home buyer just doesn't make up enough of that new home market. And so the industry's saying we're not breaking ground for a very tiny fraction of a market.
I want to ask you about another aspect of this, which is affordable housing. I noted with interest at the beginning of this conversation, you talked about what Build Canada Homes is meant to do is projects that might not quite make the cut, was what I believe you said a minute ago. The Prime Minister has said this is about building more affordable and deeply affordable housing. The government has pushed back on you guys and said the Conservatives aren't interested in affordable housing. To what extent do you believe that the market will take care of that problem?
Well, no, there's very clearly a case for government investment in affordable and deeply affordable and social and supportive housing. I've said all along that we need probably double what we have in social and supportive housing stock in this country. But what we also are pointing out is that the market housing is failing right now as well. And without market housing, your whole continuum isn't working. It is a continuum, and people need to move through that.
But do you have a plan that would specifically create more affordable housing?
Yeah, our argument is that if you're laying off people in the housing industry, the building industry is one of the largest industries in our country, and they're laying people off right now. So instead of laying people off and losing all the payroll tax revenues, for example, from all those people working, we need to be generating those kind of revenues from people working and people buying homes so that we can make sure that we have the scarce resources to invest in those deeply affordable units along with provincial and municipal governments.
The listener that we just heard from a few minutes ago in Vancouver was asking what can be done so that he sees some more immediate measures to help him find housing. What would you say the Conservative Party has to offer when we talk about that immediacy? Because, of course, homes aren't built in a day, right? So what can the Conservative Party do to get action for people more quickly?
No, and this is a really important point. I mean, the cost of housing, the cost of rentals, is one piece of a broader affordability challenge in this country. It's a real problem with everything from food prices to home prices. People can't afford to get by right now, and so and what we have said all along, what we would have done if we had formed the government, and will do if we ever get that chance, is we will reduce the burden of government. Whether that's the extra taxes that exist on the farmer that produces food and the trucker that ships the food. We need to reduce the burden of government at all levels, not just on housing, but on food production as well. And until we do that, life is just going to continue to be more expensive for Canadians.
Okay, but that's big picture. That suggests to me that quick fixes on housing aren't necessarily something any party can promise.
There aren't quick fixes on housing. But this is my argument. All along, we've said what we need is a government that is aware of the issues and taking the big swings that need to be taken. This government has had, the Liberals have had 10 years, and things have gotten demonstrably worse.
Scott Aitchison, thank you for this.
Thank you.
Conservative Party housing critic Scott Aitchison. We did request an interview with the housing minister. He wasn't available. To get another perspective on whether the government's plans are working and what more needs to be done, we've brought in two experts in the housing field. Mike Moffat is founding director of the University of Ottawa's Missing Middle Initiative and co-host of the Missing Middle podcast, and Carolyn Weitzman is a senior housing researcher and adjunct professor at the University of Toronto's School of Cities. Thank you both so much for joining me.
Lovely to be here, Catherine.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Mike, I want to start with you since you got name-checked there by Scott Aitchison. He gave the Liberals a D on their housing plan. What letter grade would you give them?
I'd be tempted to give them an incomplete, but that might be a cop-out. But I'm close to Aitchison on this. I might be a little bit more generous and give them a C-. I think they have a lot of good ideas, but they're falling down on the implementation.
Carolyn?
That is exactly what I was going to say. It isn't a plan. It doesn't have targets. It doesn't have costed out mechanisms to meet targets. We still have a national housing strategy. It's going to run out the clock in a year. What we need is a plan, a national housing strategy. So I wouldn't even give it a mark. I'd say you didn't hand in your homework.
Wow. Mike, maybe before we dig into what is and isn't there, can you just give us a sense of the state of the problem right now? We've been hearing about the national housing crisis or housing crisis as a national problem for some time. To what extent is that still true versus it being a bit more of a localized problem at this point?
I would still say it's a national problem. We have seen prices and rents fall in many locations. Prices are down as much as 25% in both Toronto and Vancouver, but they're still out of reach for middle-class families and those aspiring to join the middle class. And we're also continuing to see prices and rents rise in historically affordable markets. So we still have a long way to go to address the crisis. There are far too many Canadian families that simply can't afford a place to live or are struggling to pay other bills because where they live right now is eating up so much of their paycheck.
And Mike, you've done some analysis about the extent to which what was in the budget matches up with what the Liberals promised in their platform. What's the takeaway?
Well, they had 4 large commitments in their platform, and they've only fully implemented one of them, and that was the first-time homebuyers GST credit. They've made a couple of other promises around development charges and Build Canada homes, and they've partly moved on those. And then there was a 4th promise for incentives to create small and mid-rise apartments, and that was completely absent from the budget. So, if you've got 1 complete, 2 incomplete, and 1 missing in action.
Carolyn, Mike mentioned Build Canada Homes. Scott Aitchison talked about this as essentially just another housing bureaucracy, whereas the Liberals say this is, part of their plan to catalyze home building, and particularly with a focus on affordable housing. What do you think of Build Canada Homes?
Well, I think Build Canada Homes is a good idea for an agency. I think to some extent it builds on and hopefully at some point will merge with Canada Lands Company, which is an existing Crown corporation that's there to do development on government land. So the principles behind Build Canada Homes are good. They're things we've been calling for years. Using government land to enable permanently affordable non-market housing. Providing, combining land plus hopefully low-cost long-term finance plus construction innovation to show off what can be done. That's great. I would agree with Mike that that's one plank of a much larger strategy. But, Build Canada Homes, although it's talking a bit about supportive housing, which is great, I don't think it's there to end homelessness. The scale that's being talked about, there's 4,000 homes talked about in the budget. The Parliamentary Budget Office talks about 26,000, but that includes, running out the clock on some existing initiatives. That's nowhere close to 500,000 homes a year, let alone 500,000 homes that are affordable to the majority of Canadians. So if you're a lower moderate person who's looking for a place to rent affordably, there's no community in Canada where, say, a single mom with a kid can afford a one-bedroom, let alone a two-bedroom. There's no place where a middle-class family can afford home ownership. That's beyond Build Canada Homes.
So, Mike, how do we address that? If Build Canada Homes isn't going to take a big enough chunk out of the problem of affordable and deeply affordable housing, what is another way to come at it?
Well, I think we have to step back and have the government have an overall plan and vision on what are they trying to accomplish. One of the challenges with Build Canada Homes is that there's no targets, there's no performance indicators. I couldn't tell you 5 years from now if Build Canada Homes was a success because I don't know what it's trying to accomplish. So I think we need to step back and think through what we're trying to accomplish here, have some targets, some indicators, and has some difficult questions around, home prices, for example. We have a minister who keeps telling us that, home prices can't go down, but there's no way to create affordability for the middle class or those aspiring to join it without prices going down. So I think it's less about the policy and more about having an overall vision of the type of housing system that we want to create for Canada.
Carolyn, what about this piece that is development charges? Scott Aitchison talked a lot about that. We know that the government also agrees it's an issue. They want to drive it down. The question, I guess, at this point is to what extent?
Well, on the one hand, you have municipalities trying to replace infrastructure, create new infrastructure with about 10 cents on the tax dollar, and that's a problem. And there's lots of other countries around the world where municipalities can get a share of income tax or a share of sales tax. So there is a kind of substantive issue that needs to be solved. Having said that, taxing growth pays for growth, taxing newcomers is a terrible, terrible idea, particularly in a housing crisis. So, we've been talking around that solution for a long time. The Housing Accelerator Fund was intended to at least partly address that solution. I'm a big believer in conditional funding, so infrastructure funding in return for the kinds of things that both Mike and I are talking about, which are targets and indicators of success. But, yes, development charges are a problem. And yes, some kind of substantive alternative needs to be found.
Mike, we've only got about a minute left here. In closing, I'd like to ask you what your message is for people like Peter DeVoost, who we heard from a few minutes ago, people who worry that the chance to buy a house is just going to pass them by because this problem is taking too long to address.
Well, unfortunately, that problem is real, and I fear that too many individuals and families see it as a personal failing when, in fact, it's the system that has failed them. So I think it's important for people like Peter to keep telling their stories, to keep pushing governments to address this crisis, that it is only going to be the actions of government to lower the cost of home building, to create a social housing system that works across Canada. That's the only way we're going to be able to house everyone in this country. So we need more action, and we need people to be telling their stories.
Appreciate both of you giving us your insights today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Mike Moffat with the University of Ottawa's Missing Middle Initiative and Carolyn Weitzman with the University of Toronto's School of Cities. Next on the House podcast, former Ambassador Bob Rae on Donald Trump trying to resolve global conflicts and why some meetings really shouldn't happen over Zoom. I'm Catherine Cullen. You're listening to The House, making politics make sense. Make sure you give us a follow so you never miss an episode, and tell us what you think of the show. You can email us at thehouse@cbc.ca. For 5 years, Bob Rae was Canada's representative to the United Nations, beginning during the COVID pandemic, leaving during the second Trump administration. It has been tumultuous. And that's just one chapter of his political life. Ontario's first and only NDP premier, interim leader for the federal Liberals, chief negotiator for a Northern Ontario tribal council. What lessons has he learned? And what does he really think of Donald Trump? I spoke with the former UN ambassador earlier this week. Bob Rae, thank you for making the time.
Great pleasure to be with you, Catherine.
You've worn so many different hats. Federal NDP finance critic as the Joe Clark government fell, premier, interim Liberal leader federally, chief negotiator, special advisor, ambassador. Do you have a favorite gig?
Yeah, I think husband, father, and grandpa is probably the best thread that I have. But I would say they've all been interesting, and I've been very lucky, really lucky in my life to have been able to find different ways of serving at different times. It's been quite wonderful. And this last five and a half years have been really fascinating, and I can't say often enough how much I've appreciated the honor of serving the country, and also express my thanks to the two prime ministers for putting up with me, and several ministers of foreign affairs as well. So it's been great.
One thing that is interesting to me about all these different hats, these different ways to serve, as you put it, is that it's given you all these different vantage points on public life, on Canadian policy. What do you think all of these perspectives has allowed you to appreciate about politics that most people don't?
The lucky thing for me is that I've not only had the opportunity to serve, but I've also had the opportunity to learn. So I don't mind saying that, you know, my life is a continuous exercise in learning. And some of my critics will say, you've still got a long way to go, so that's fine. I accept that. I have, I was elected for the first time in 1978. So in 2 years, it'll be 50 years from the time of my first election to the House of Commons.
Wow.
And yeah, exactly. Wow. And that's what, and I'm going on from this interview to a presentation to my grandson's public school in Toronto. So the questions there will be equally tough as well. But the thing that I'll say to them is politics is a necessary part of life. And we dismiss politics or simply criticize the whole activity to our peril, because politics at its best, particularly in democracies which are under so much threat these days, is really vitally important. Just the exercise of debating and discussing and trying to persuade, and the process of persuading, and people having to get elected. These are fundamental features of what it means to live in a free society. And so I'm a big defender of politics, and I continue to be to say, people often ask me, should I go into politics? And I say to them, absolutely. If that's in your gut to do that, then by all means go ahead, because it needs good practitioners.
When it comes to your time at the UN, it was shaped by so many crises, right? COVID, Afghanistan, Ukraine, Gaza, the list goes on. Can you tell me about a moment where you saw firsthand why it can be so difficult to get countries to work together to try to solve some of these problems?
Well, I think the most emotional discussion was about Gaza, and equally so also with Ukraine. And I think the challenge in both cases as to why conflicts have gone on for so long and why they've been so costly and hugely costly in human life and in human terms, I don't just mean money, is because people are so dug in their fixed positions, and it's really difficult to get people to move. And I think we're seeing how tough that is in many of the conflicts around the world. On the other hand, there are moments where the light gets in, where you see the beginnings of some possible changes in even intractable conflicts that people say, well, maybe now we can make some progress. And this is in ways often that people don't even see. I mean, one of the most interesting changes that hardly ever gets discussed is the fact that Saudi Arabia and Iran are now talking to each other. But if you look at that whole arc of countries going all the way over from Afghanistan all the way through to the Horn of Africa, the fight between Sunni and Shia has been fundamental to that huge set of conflicts that we've had over the last 35, 40 years. So if there can be a reduction in the level of violence on the basis of religion, that's sort of equivalent to the Protestant Catholic 100 Years' War ending in Europe. And, conflicts do come to an end, even great cyclical moments in history when people just say, this is just crazy. And that's the moment of realization that, that we all need to see much more often, but we occasionally do see it.
So much of that, though, sounds so out of our control. And I wonder if you've left the UN with a feeling about how we can let more of that light in, create more of those cracks.
Well, I think the main thing is, as Churchill said, never, ever, ever give up. I mean, we can't, when people talk about disengaging from either the UN or from various other international institutions, that troubles me enormously. And that's frankly what troubles me the most about the world today, where like George Orwell's, three super states of Oceania, Eurasia, East Asia. We have China, Russia, and the United States now clearly feeling from everything that they're saying that they can find a way to solve problems without anybody else really being involved, and they'll just do the deals on the side. That does not give rise to great hope, because it means that a whole lot of interests are not being considered, and the broader public interest in the rule of law is not being considered, and that's what makes that worrisome.
But I don't know that it's obvious to most Canadians that the United Nations is a meaningful solution to that.
Well, I mean, the UN is a troubled institution, but the reason it's a troubled institution is mainly because member states are not committed to it, and too many member states are not committed to it. And they're not committed to the principles of international law. That's the main problem. Problem isn't, quote, the UN. I've quoted Richard Holbrooke many times in the last 3 weeks because I get this question quite a lot from people. And I say, look, don't blame Madison Square Gardens every time the Knicks lose. And that's a very meaningful statement, because what is critical to understand is, don't blame the global architecture because the people who are moving the furniture around don't care about the state of the building. We have to understand that when member states pull away from the principles of the UN, and in reality from the UN itself, they're really pulling away from the idea that it's worthwhile to try to solve global problems with a global perspective, and that's missing. You can't solve climate change without a global agreement, and without not just agreements, but without people actually changing the way they pollute the world. You can't solve the issues around a pandemic like the one we saw with COVID without global agreement. You can't have. We don't have smoking sections on airplanes anymore. And there's a reason for that, and that's because smoke spreads around the whole plane. That's exactly what's happening globally in a lot of these conflicts and a lot of these situations which demand global perspective.
Well, the President of the United States, the last time we spoke to you on the House was at the United Nations calling climate change a hoax, deriding global migration, complaining about the UN escalators. Bob Rae, I wonder what you think Donald Trump's lasting impact is going to be.
Well, quite honestly, I hope he doesn't have a lasting impact. I mean, I would be kidding myself if I said that I did. I hope that the impact he has will be as temporary as possible, because a lot of the things that his type of thinking is contributing to takes us away from the need to build stronger institutions that work well and to build them based on values which have real deep meaning for people. In other words, I don't think life is just a transaction. I don't think international relations are just about how much can we get out of this, and how much can we take temporary advantage of this person's either weakness or problems to take unfair advantage of that. I mean, that's not my moral frame, and I don't know why anybody who agrees with me would say, well, you can feel that way, but don't say it out loud. You sort of say, we kind of have to start saying things out loud that need to be said.
Well, is there anything, I mean, you don't have to be diplomatic anymore. Is there anything you really want to get off your chest about what you think of Donald Trump?
No, I'm doing a pretty good job of it now, I think. And it's not just him. It's not just a personal thing. Mm-hmm. It's not at all that. It's that, as I said, life, Pope Leo is saying it as much as clearly as anybody these days. We do owe something to our neighbor. We do live in a world where we have to take care of each other if we're going to get through this better. And in taking care of each other, we do it in accordance with certain basic moral and political principles. And I attach a lot of importance to those. And I think there's a lot of people in the world who do. And therefore, the disruptors in the world, whether they're people or regimes or technologies, can't be allowed to have the last word.
I think that brings us to the part of the conversation I want to have with you about a domestic issue, which is relationships with Indigenous peoples. Before you were at the UN, you were at one point chief negotiator of the Matawa Tribal Council, which represents 9 First Nations around the Ring of Fire in Northern Ontario. I wonder what strikes you about the way the Carney government has handled the federal government's relationship with Indigenous peoples.
Well, I would not limit it simply to the Carney government, but to provincial governments as well. And that is that the foundational principle, I think, that is set out in the Report on Truth and Reconciliation and is made clear in many, many Supreme Court decisions. The fundamental principle is that we're all here to stay. We have an obligation to treat each other with respect and with dignity. And there's a lot in our past that we have to overcome. And those principles are, for me, foundational. The Matawa experience for me was an extraordinary exercise in education and learning, and frankly, humility in understanding that people who have been living on the land that they are on, north of Thunder Bay, up towards James Bay, not frequently traveled or seen by 99.9% of Canadians, is land that is home to extraordinary people who have had to weather incredible challenges in terms of the life prior to contact, if you like, and then after the fur trade and all of the other changes that went on, the residential schools and the whole shifting of life for people. I've come out of it with a lot of determination and a great sense of who they are and what what they stand for in the world. I wonder if they have a wonderful sort of slogan for the organization called the power of unity and the dignity of difference, which I make no apologies for having used in many other contexts, always with attribution. But it's a reminder of what we need to think about. And we will not be able to build pipelines in this country without Indigenous participation and consent. It's not just a law; it's also the right thing to do, because it recognizes the attachment to the land that's theirs, and that we have to come to terms with that as a country. And I think frankly, I heard Mr. Carney's speech this week at the Indigenous conference, and I think he said it very clearly. He said, "We will not be doing anything without the consent of the people whose consent we required to do these projects." And I think that's clearly an embrace by him of what the law is. Now, he himself, as I think, felt and understands that the province of British Columbia, the province of Alberta, and the Indigenous governing authorities in both provinces are going to need to come together with the federal government to reach sustainable goals and sustainable agreements. And this will have to be done in stages. You're not going to have one big conference and that'll settle the issue. It's going to be done through a painstaking process of discussion. And the Prime Minister made the decision to have the first agreement with the province of Alberta. He's fully entitled to do that. But I think everybody understands that that's just the first step in what will be a long process. And it needs to be a respectful one. And it won't happen on Zoom. It's going to happen in person. It's going to happen in community meetings. It's going to happen.
Little note to Tim Hodgson there, I think, sir.
No, not just him, but I mean, I think we all need to understand. Those of us who've been involved in these discussions over the last 50 years, as I have been, is you learn basically that the consultation that happens is one that respects ceremony. It respects the Indigenous leadership in every way, and it takes time. And all governments are going to have to develop their capacities to understand what each government is trying to do. Often we talk about, well, the First Nations need capacity to understand these projects, and I've always said to people, the First Nations are not the only ones who need capacity. We all need capacity in life, and governments, frankly, need capacity. How many Indigenous language speakers do we have among the team of negotiators that are going to talk to elders and going to talk to others? It's a diplomacy inside our country is just as important as the diplomacy outside our country, and that's something we're all going to have to learn.
I want to ask you about tough choices in politics. Some people in Ontario might still have some strong feelings about what were called Rae days, right? Public sector workers being asked to go without pay when you reopen their contracts in response to a recession. I'm not trying to bring up an uncomfortable moment, but I do wonder what lesson or lessons you learned about making tough policy choices, because we are in a time of a lot of tough political choices.
Well, I mean, it's not uncomfortable for me at all, which is to say, one of the things that I would say I've learned in life, and social media in a way forces you to do this, is to understand that you're surrounded by criticism. I mean, you whatever you do is going to be criticized in politics. And if you start to take that personally and say, oh, I'm going to flip this way or that way, whatever, you can't really handle it well. But it does mean in embracing criticism, you have to listen to it. And I think that the mistake that I made was in not making it clear enough to myself and to others that there were a range of options that could be considered in dealing with the recession. And the one that we concluded and we proposed and then discussed for a period of many, many months before introducing legislation was in reflection, and my own certainly reflection, was probably the fairest of the ones that we were looking at. I think with the benefit of hindsight, I think one could say, well, yeah, but you could have done this or you could have done that. And you say, yes, absolutely right. And I think I consider the social contract and Rae days. I mean, look, no other premiers had days named after them. This is an historic achievement. But seriously, the purpose of Rae days was to save jobs in the public sector. It was to save nurses' jobs. It was to save teachers' jobs. Were there other ways we could have done that? They would come with a certain price as well. The problem with the method that we adopted was that it divided my party, the New Democratic Party at the time, and I think you could say it was a policy success because we achieved the savings we wanted to achieve, and we did not lose any days, significant number of days, to strikes or anything of that kind. But we created a lot of resentment among the leadership of many of the unions and others who felt they needed to support them because of the principles of solidarity. And in doing that, I certainly affected the political trajectory of my own life. But more than that, I think it affected a number of others. So if people say, do you have regrets? You say, of course. I don't. I mean, I'm not like Edith Piaf. I do live with.
Rien. Yeah.
No, I do regret some things because it was painful and it was hard personally for me. Would I have made the same decision if I had had more experience or had an opportunity to really sort of think through how else to get through the crisis? Maybe. But I mean, the thing that I keep feeling very strongly is that my political and economic and moral principles and the values that I take into the work that I've done before and after haven't changed. I think that, I've been a member of two parties, and I think that's it for me.
You won't be running for conservative leadership anytime soon.
No, that's not going to happen. And I don't think there are many conservatives who would line up to say, that's great, let's get this guy back. No, but seriously, I think it's in whatever party I've been in, I've taken up positions that I think have been pretty consistent, for better or for worse. And so, the fact that that you are in more than one party in your life is not the end of the world. The idea that partisan loyalty would be the defining, the definition of who you are as a person is, I think, a little odd to myself. I mean, lots of political leaders have changed parties in order to try to achieve goals which they thought were important.
We have just a moment left. What's next for you, Bob Rae?
The short answer is I don't know exactly. I've been approached by Queen's University, and I've accepted to do some teaching at Queen's. I will be doing some teaching at the University of Toronto, both in Victoria College and elsewhere. I'm associated with the Monk School. I'm a senior fellow at Massey College, which is where I will have my office. So it's going to be involving in education, public speaking, and writing and reading, frankly, because you don't get a lot of chances to kind of really read stuff and really think through what you've been doing while you're doing it. It just, the time doesn't make it possible. But now I'm going to have time for a slightly different life, and yes, seriously, I am going to be spending a lot more time with children and grandchildren, who are, luckily for me, all living in Toronto, so we'll be able to see each other more often. So, yeah, that's what I'll be doing.
Well, we want to get you to that appointment with your grandson's class, and I hope it's wonderful, and I hope you learn something. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us, Bob Rae.
I will. I can guarantee you that I will. Thank you so much.
Canada's former ambassador to the UN, Bob Rae. Okay, that's it for us this week. Our crew on the house is Emma Godmere, Benjamin Lopez-Steven, and our senior producer this week is Kristen Everson. Technical production by Miguel Plant. I'm Catherine Cullen. Thank you so much for listening.